Hello, happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to today's program on the biodiversity of the Bay Area. My name is Mark Medeiros. I am the Senior Manager of Community Engagement at Peninsula Open Space Trust, and thank you all so much for joining us. Before we begin, as usual, I would like to acknowledge the Native people whose territories we are joining from. Considering post-working area, I'd like to acknowledge the Amamutsun Tribal Band, the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and the Ramaytush Ohlone. But wherever you are, please pause to acknowledge the Native people whose land you are on. Actually, if you know their names, feel free to shout them out in chat. And welcome to any members of the Native communities who are joining us today. Remember that after acknowledging these communities, the next step is to learn more, and particularly about how you could support these communities. So for those of you new to Post's community, welcome. A couple of words about Post. We are a 501c3 nonprofit land trust based in Palo Alto, serving San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, primarily a little bit of northern Santa Cruz County. And since our founding, we have protected over 80,000 acres of open space, farms, and parkland in the region. Most of this is now part of the regional parks networks that we have: San Mateo County Parks, Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, state parks, all wonderful parks agencies that are providing us wonderful access to this open space. And it's because of thousands of people in our community that we have been able to be so successful over these past 40 plus years. So we want to say thank you to all of you who are watching. Many of you are donors. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for being a part of this community and making this work possible. So today we are going to be focusing on biodiversity and the wonderful wildlife and plant communities that we have in our region. So Post protects land not only for recreation and to preserve our local agriculture, but we have a very large focus on protecting our wildlife and the ecosystems that harbor this wildlife. This is a wonderful map we like to show, with yellow areas highlighted being areas of greater connectivity across these habitats that we have in the region. And so Post is working to protect large, diverse blocks of habitat so that wildlife can continue to move and adapt with climate change. And one particular area that is very important that we've been doing a lot of work in is Coyote Valley in South San Jose, widely recognized by all sorts of environmental organizations as a critical wildlife corridor between these large habitat blocks of the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Diablo Range. And so we've been successful with our partners, the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, City of San Jose, Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency, and many others in making some great strides in this area. So we wanted to mention that, a little context about what Post is doing about biodiversity and habitat connectivity in the region. So we are going to be speaking with a wonderful local author who is probably the best person I could think of to give us a deep kind of view of the history of this area and why it's so special as a biodiversity hotspot. So today we're going to be hearing from Mary Ellen Hannibal, and she's written several wonderful books, including The Spine of the Continent and Citizen Science. She's a contributing writer for Bay Nature, the San Francisco Chronicle, Nautilus, Science, and Anthropocene, and has won many awards. She's a nationally acclaimed award-winning writer. And we had the privilege of hosting her in 2016 as part of our Wallace Stegner lecture series, which is underway currently. And so she's a fixture in the community, really wonderful person. And with that, I'm going to welcome Mary Ellen Hannibal to the program. How are you doing, Mary Ellen?
I'm good, Mark. It's great to be here on this, have this nice lunch hour talk.
Great. Well, thank you so much for making the time. Like I said, we're going to go deep, and you're going to give us you're going to blow our minds with a lot of context going back thousands of years. So I'm very excited. There's a lot to get through, but before you get started, I just wanted to ask, as a person, what brought you to this work? How did you become this focused on these topics that you write so eloquently about?
Well, I love that question, Mark. So thank you for asking. So I did start out my career in a different direction, although I did grow up on the beach on Long Island. So I grew up immersed in nature the way that many people here in the Bay Area are able to. And so my imagination and my consciousness were awakened in that context. And that's really where everything starts. But I did spend the first part of my career in magazines and writing really about literature. And I was an English major in college. And I just thought everything was really about literature. And then over the years, I worked in all kinds of different ways as an editor and as a writer. And basically, I took all these different kinds of jobs because I was trying to write fiction. And I never got that published, which I'm so glad I didn't. I'm really glad that's not out there. And I found myself really working a lot for nonprofits in the Bay Area in particular, kind of developed a little cottage industry. This is, going back a couple of decades by now.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all really to do with nature. And I just loved the topic. And it really turned around for me in about 2009. I wrote a book called Evidence of Evolution with a photographer, Susan Middleton. I have some of her photographs, I think, in my slide deck today. And it was when I was writing that book, I just kind of had like a flow moment of, wow, evolution is the story. Mm-hmm. That is the narrative. And it has not even really been probed by creative writers or too many artists. Mm-hmm. There's just so much there. And that really set me on my path. And then I wrote The Spine of the Continent. And actually, you know what, Mark? I did 2 Stegner lectures because I did one on the Spine of the Continent way back when, too. And that's all about large landscape connectivity. It's focused in the Rockies, but it's totally relevant to us here. Mm-hmm. And that's where I really understood this movement over space and time that segues into my talk today. And then my book, Citizen Scientist, came out of The Spine of the Continent, where I wanted to know, we got to help nature. How are we going to do it? But Citizen Scientist, I focused a lot on the Bay Area, and that helped me understand how things have changed over time here. And so there's really a lot of California in there. And I wish I could just write books about California because it's so fascinating and relevant. So I just, for the last, at least since, at least more than 10 years, I've been really hard on this path, and I will stay on this path until I croak.
Man, well, I appreciate hearing that because I've read your books, and it's cool to have that context. So many of us are interested in science and understanding our local area, but bringing the art, and your wonderful kind of prose and that kind of more artistic context for it has been really special for me and a lot of other people. So thank you for spending time with us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. I see a lot of people joining in chat. So just bring up your slides, Mary Ellen, and I'll let you know when you're all ready there. And thank you to all of you for the comments. All right, Mary Ellen, so you're ready to go.
Okay, great.
And have fun.
Thank you. I will. So this is just, a photograph of the coast. And we're so lucky here in the Bay Area. We just, anywhere we look, we see just layers and layers of beauty almost everywhere. So Post asked me to write a blog last December, about why the Bay Area is a biodiversity hotspot. And I said, sure, I'd love to. But then I realized once I just started it that the actual hotspot designation is to the California floristic province. So it's really almost the whole state of California, plus going into a little of Oregon and maybe a little Washington. I have some maps of that. So biodiversity hotspots, the official designation, was established in 1988 or 89 by the UN, and an ecologist named Norman Myers suggested this. He said there's, biodiversity is not uniformly distributed around the world. Then, as now, there were, huge alarms about how much biodiversity we're losing. And so the hotspot idea was a way to say, where is the most biodiversity? Where are the places to focus on saving? Where should we, put our efforts first? And it's an interesting thing because there's a lot of different ways of looking at nature, and the hotspot concept isn't the only way to kind of measure it, but it's useful. So the two criteria are at least 1,500 vascular plants that are endemic. And endemic means they grow here and they're from here. And they can grow other places, some of them, but not all of them can. And then this place must have lost 30% or less of its original natural vegetation. But that loss is kind of this extraordinary thing in California, because we've lost quite a lot, but we still have so much. So here's a map of the biodiversity hotspots around the world. There's now 34 of them, I believe. There's actually one that is not on this map that is super interesting, and that's on the East Coast, and was named a new hotspot in 2016. But there you can see over on the left, the California floristic province. And that's just, here we are, California, absolutely beautiful coast, mountains, and terrain. So life on Earth, it begins with the sun. And it's important to remember that, because plants are the engines that transform that sun's energy into the rest of life on Earth for us. And the process by which the plants have come to be on the Earth has been fueled over millions and millions of years through a dynamic interaction between the geology, between the rocks of the Earth and the sunlight. And so the sun has created weather, including the ocean currents, winds, rain, which erodes rock into soils. And different rock types become different soils. And then, I think it was how many 100 millions of years ago plants evolved, and different plants evolved in different soils. So there's the map of the floristic province. Here's another map of it. You can see it goes to Mexico and a little to Oregon, sort of excludes the desert, the Sonoran Desert part of the state. And here is, just to take us all the way back in deep time, these are maps of the slow and gradual forming, really, of California and the Bay Area. So if you want to look at these maps, start at the bottom right, because that's the oldest, the late Cretaceous. And just take a look at that map and you'll see that California wasn't really there yet. And then over millions and millions of years, you can see this gradual formation. And this is the work of geology, right? This is the mountains are uplifting and they're moving around thanks to earthquakes. And the continent is shifting and coming into the focus that we know of it today. So this is really going backwards from the bottom right to the bottom left, and then from the top right to the top left, which is the present day. And those black dots are fossil sites. This is a These are maps from this book, Ecosystems of California. And that the article, though, the piece in there is by Elizabeth Hadley, who's a Stanford biology professor, with another writer whose name I'm blanking on, about the evolution of the incredible mammal diversity of California and how it came to be. But the reason the mammal diversity became so articulated was because of the plant diversity. And just if anybody's really into all of this, this book is so awesome. It's expensive. It's a textbook. And it is like, I like to call it the Finnegan's Wake of California, because it is about every single kind of time frame, every single process, every single biome, and taking it all together. It's like a psychedelic portrait of California. But if you don't want to buy that, you can find this online in a PDF. This was a supplement to that book. And it's an excellent supplement about what we should do to try to protect this biodiversity. And guess what, people at Post? A lot of it is about large landscape conservation, but we'll get back to that. So this is a map, if you can kind of focus on the brownish purplish blob at the top and see that there's the whole continent is in there. And that's the North American plate. And then to the left, the yellow is the Pacific plate. And basically these are two, gigantic plates of rock underneath the water and underneath the surface of the earth that are in constant jostling with each other. And they have, I like this description. Someone put it as like a deck of cards that gets kind of shuffled up every once in a while. So sometimes they come together and some older rocks are actually pushed up above younger rocks. And one of my favorite books, another favorite book, is The Geology of the San Francisco Bay Region by Doris Sloan. And it's a very, very clear book about geology. But even she says that the Bay Area defies reason. We're still really talking about California, though. So here is part of California, and it's just to show the complexity of these rock formations. So over those millions and millions of years, as the landforms were changing, there were different old plants that grew, and some of those plants are still with us today, like the redwoods. So this is a map of the current coast redwood range, but these are ancient plants that have survived different epochs and changes. And also very old plants that go way back are on this screen. And the more you guys have probably be hikers and you've seen some of these, it's just awesome to go to sort of high elevations and find these ancient trees. This is another book that I recommend, Beauty and the Beast. It's a beautiful photo book of plants in California, focusing on wildflowers. And there's a bunch of essays in this book. I wrote one of them about citizen science. There's an excellent essay or two about plant evolution. And there's a photograph from the book. So one of the things about California is it's still so very beautiful. We still have so much, even though a great huge amount of California has been transformed into built human places and agriculture. I don't even know what that is or where it is, but I couldn't resist putting it in because it was so crazy beautiful. I mean, the colors are so much. Some of you probably know what that is. So the plant life, the floristic province was developed partly because when you look at that map of California, and we know that we have the Sierras and we have the coastal ranges, we have that big middle part where the Central Valley is, that is a lot of agriculture. Kent Lightfoot very memorably, I think, said it looks like the letter Q that's been put on a diet. But basically diversity happens when there's geographical separation between species. So the plants that grew in California as our Mediterranean climate developed were separated from the Rocky Mountains and from the Intermountain West by mountain ranges. And that's partly why we have this California floristic province. We also have it because we are on the west coast of a big continent. And this is one of the kinds of places that Mediterranean climates develop. But as the plant life is developing, so then come animals and everything else, including birds. So birds play their part in making this a biodiversity hotspot in general. So now we're moving past the concept of the California floristic province to a more generalized view of California as having incredible biodiversity of all kinds. This is a map that is one, if you're a birder, you know these maps probably. They are made by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they're visualizing pathways, migration pathways of species of birds. They have lots and lots of these visualizations on the Cornell website, and some of them are animations that are really cool. But what I, as an avid citizen scientist, really love is that these visualizations are made from data that has been contributed to Cornell and to other databases by regular people like you and me over more than 100 years. And so when people make observations of where they see birds when, that becomes, when it's verified, it becomes a data point. And then through those data points, we can start making a map of where they were when, which allows us to see where they go. And now this is kind of looks like threads or filaments. And I really like that because it expresses this kind of sense of connection. And, Mark mentioned connectivity as this main, focus of what POST does. And POST is focused on the landscape, on protecting and stewarding the physical land, but connectivity exists in the skies as well. And it goes back through time. And it's hard to grok that, I think. But these visualizations and just thinking about birds and bird lives, I think helps try to get a kind of handle on what immense, immersive, continuous dynamics are going on here that we're part of. So that's just another map. There's the Pacific Flyway, and then you see North America has basically got 4 different flyways. And I don't know enough about this. I've read something about how these flyways are kind of divided up. And again, their mountain ranges come into play, and so do different types of terrain. So different kinds of birds are adapted to, different kinds of terrain. Some of them want boreal forest, and some migrate, some stay where they are. It's very complicated and wonderful. And then another hugely significant thing for us here in the Bay Area is where is the California current. So up there on the left, you see those words, California current. And we are one of these 4 major ocean currents that are circulating. They're part of the global circulation model of the whole Earth. And some of you may know the story of the California current that yearly comes around through temperature and precipitation and wind. This weather pattern comes and kicks up organic material from the very bottom of the ocean off of our coast. So this is organic material that is decomposing or stopped decomposing, but some things died and floated to the bottom, and where there's no light. So then the wind helps, this current kicks up that biotic material to the surface where it photosynthesizes, and then it becomes food. And then small fish come along and eat it, and bigger fish come along and eat them. And this whole huge marine food web occurs, going all the way up to the great white sharks that circle around the Farallones in the summertime as part of this upwelling, it's called, of the California current. But this can't be overstated. The resources, the marine resources that are here, right here off the coast of California, and then those marine resources are deposited by birds and other animals that live both, a terrestrial and an aquatic. They straddle the terrestrial and the aquatic realms, and they help move those nutrients onto the land, which helps create this robust and diversified biodiversity that we have. These birds, a couple of slides are from a class that I took at the California Academy of Sciences, not this last January, but the January before, given by Megan Prellinger. And she gives this every year. It's a 3-part class on diving birds. And she chooses these 4 big groups of diving birds who migrate through the Bay Area to illustrate how they have different adaptive strategies and go different places, different lengths of places to feed. And they have also been doing this for a very long time. So those Gavidae have been doing this for 65 million years. This is longer than that California coast that we recognize it has existed. So these birds have helped knit up the fabric of life. And then you can see she's got here that these 2 groups have foot-propelled diving, then wing-propelled diving, and both wing and foot. And this is a beautiful way of showing evolution and ecology intersecting, because these birds have evolved these different strategies, these different physical characteristics to make them have the capacity to get food from different kinds of habitat, but it's all right next to each other. So pelagic is deep water, benthic, I'm not going to tell you the right definition of that. Intertidal is right at the coast, and then the marsh is right, really that transitional zone between aquatic and terrestrial. And these different birds have different ways of getting food out of those different habitats. And here, this is the last, I think this is my last bird slide, but these bird talons have all evolved to help them get their prey or move through the water or move through the sky in different ways. And they share, they're sharing the resources essentially with each other. And this is just another, I guess this is my last bird slide, but you can see that we are on this incredible Pacific coast, Pacific flyway, which extends all the way down through South America and up to the Bering Strait. And, this is good to show what connectivity is all about, because we focus, on protecting lands and making sure that one piece of land is not cut off from another. But connectivity exists on this bigger scale as well. But it comes all the way back down to the smaller scale, because these birds, for example, need to be able to use habitat here as part of their life history. And we can cut them off from their history of using the landscape here by developing right on their habitat. This is a manzanita, and these, I think I just took 1 or 2 slides from this amazing talk by Tom Parker, who is the king of manzanitas and a professor at UCSF, who gave this talk either last week or the week before for Friends of the San Pedro, I don't know if it's park. It's on their website. And manzanita they're endemic there are some endemic species to California. They grow all over California, and they also grow in other parts of the world, but they are highly adapted here. And so you can look up there on the left that their history goes back. There were fossils found of these plants 40 million years ago, 25 million years ago, 15 million years ago. My favorite part on this slide is that red blob, because if you look right next to that red blob, if you can make it out, it's kind of small. You can see that the way that the Bay Area looks there 15 million years ago is not how it looks today. And as Tom Parker put it, the manzanita was ready to be a Californian before California was here. And then when California did come into focus, the manzanita really distributed widely over it. So now just going back through history, we come out of the realm of this deep, deep, deep history of biotic interactions between the abiotic world of weather, rocks, and sunlight into the ancient and continuing biotic interactions of plants and birds and all sorts of other species. And we address now the human impact on the landscape. So this map is of California, and it was believed for many, many years that California was the Garden of Eden. People from Europe were looking for the Garden of Eden, and they thought that it must be over in California. It was hard to navigate up the Pacific coast, harder for people from Europe. First of all, they had to get all the way over here. So there was no Panama Canal, so they had to go all the way around the bottom of South America. And even so, early mapping showed that California was not an island, but it persisted in people's minds as an island long after it had kind of been shown that it wasn't. But in some ways, it is an island. It just is not separate from the mainland by water. It's separate from the rest of the mainland by mountains. So that was the sort of mental idea of the Spanish. Now I'm going to just move quickly through some of the creatures that we had in much more abundance on the landscape around the time of colonialism. So whales. Whales were decimated out of our waters. These are fur seals. They were decimated all over the coast. The first settlers, European settlers, well, they weren't European, they were Russians who established Fort Ross and had a fur trading business. Here's a grizzly bear. You all know that, right? We've got a grizzly bear on our state flag and not a single grizzly bear in the state. And a wolf. Just to talk for 1 minute about the grizzly bear. The grizzly bear, as you know, because you've probably seen like YouTube videos of them grabbing salmon out of streams, both eating marine nutrients and terrestrial nutrients, and an important player in moving those marine nutrients onto the landscape. But of course, that doesn't happen at all anymore through grizzly bears. Wolves, another important player in the food web. And then those redwood trees, which the range of them, the size of the forests were just vastly reduced in a very short order in the gold rush. And here's a beaver. Beavers also were decimated off the landscape. We have some in California, and there's good efforts to put them back on the landscape. But the beaver, like even more than the grizzly bear, has this role. They're not just food web movers and changers. They change the geomorphology where they live. And that means when they put up their dams, they change the water flow, and it creates different habitat. It creates a different flow between that abiotic world of the weather and the rain and the water as it flows through the system, and the biotic world of living things that find their habitat within the meadows and the shores that are made possible by beavers. So this is a slide simply saying, when you take all of these kinds of creatures off the landscape degrades. It does not function as well. This is from a paper called Trophic Downgrading of Planet Earth, and it consolidated data and studies from all over the world. So some of these species are not California species, but we certainly have the same issue here. And they're number B, jaguar, cougar, the mountain lion is our top predator now. So here is the Bay Area, and you can see that it is so complex. Now we're focusing in on the Bay Area as a biodiversity hotspot. And the amazing thing is it really still is a biodiversity hotspot with a lot of endemic plants and animals, despite the fact that you can see in the white how much of it has been developed. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge fully the Bay Delta system. Here's an image of the earthquake. So those ancient forces that started our talk are still working here. Where's my Bay Delta? I'm getting ahead of myself. I have another Bay Delta slide later, I guess. So I will just say that the Bay Delta, these rivers, the San Joaquin, the Sacramento River, all the rivers that flow toward the coast, come through the bays. We think of rivers as, or I do anyway, they're water. So we think of them as like a circulatory system for the earth. And so they are. But, I feel like we need to change the way we think of these things a little bit. Rivers are also really like these cables, these like incredible steel cables connecting the atmospheric world with the geological world through the hydrological world. And we pound away at these and we do break those ties. So connectivity is also through the waterways, and we also disrupt that kind of connectivity by the way that we change waterways. And it's, what you're doing at Post, what we're all doing with Post is of the utmost importance. But another really important area to focus on in the Bay Area are all the issues with the Bay Delta. So there's our mountain lion, and the mountain lion is the top predator that we have left, performs a very important trophic or food web function, like the wolf and the grizzly bear, but has to do it all by itself now in California, and is kind of a poster child in some ways for this connectivity that's necessary for us to protect here in Coyote Valley, which Mark mentioned at the beginning of the talk. So this is still, very, very important place to focus on. And you can just see right on this map that if we don't protect that connectivity, you can see the gray area between the Diablo Mountains and the Santa Cruz Mountains, and how we could really snip the ties that bind the whole thing together. And to remember that the flow of energy and animals and plants has been going on through these places for millions and millions of years. And one of the extraordinary things about human beings is that we're able to sever those ties so quickly. Because we haven't been aware of what we were doing. And that's where we're trying to wake up. We're trying to wake up to participate in a better way with the world that we live in. And supporting connectivity here is deeply part of it. I stole this off the Post website I didn't want to leave reptiles and amphibians out of the picture. Connectivity is important from top to bottom, not just for big animals like mountain lions, but for reptiles and amphibians as well. So this book has become really popular. It's just amazing. It's been out since 2011. It's a beautiful book. I recommend it. And it has recently become a bestseller. And I'm not sure actually how that happened. But a lot of what Robin Wall Kimmerer has to say is that we have a relationship with the other species that we live among. And it's a reciprocal relationship, but we haven't been reciprocating very well. I have, it's just kind of fascinating. The Biodiversity Hotspot is one concept for how to, think of nature in your mind to help save it. Another way is through these very personal and very direct interactions. This paper, I think, is one of the most important papers of the last 100 years. Came out in 1964. Paul Ehrlich and Peter Raven will go down in history for this. And they basically quantify what Robin Wall Kimmerer is talking about. Plants and animals, butterflies and plants have evolved together. So they have become who they are, not alone, but in response to how the other. This is the Bay checker spot butterfly, and the pixelated photo on the left is owl's clover. I think these are both photographs from Coyote Valley or from Edgewood. I think these are from Edgewood Park. And here is Stu Weiss, who's the butterfly whisperer of the peninsula. And he does a lot of work with Edgewood, and he also works with all kinds of people to try to sustain butterfly populations. And that's all about sustaining plants. Then another thing that happened, and we're all kind of keenly aware of this now because we live in California, is when the Spanish came, they interrupted the native practices of burning the landscape. And people just kind of never really knew or didn't clue into the fact that the burning was actually part of how the landscape works. So I love this title, Forgotten Fires. Those of you who follow this know, you can see that on Forgotten Fires, edited and with an introductions by Henry Lewis and Kat Anderson. And Kat Anderson, of course, wrote Tending the Wild, which, like Braiding Sweetgrass, is a cult favorite for good reason, highly recommended. I also recommend California Indians and Their Environment by Kent Lightfoot and Otis Parrish. This is really, in both cases, talking a lot about the interaction between humans and the species in which we live. And California Indians, all indigenous stories are not the same. Plenty of indigenous stories are about exhausting resources and moving on from them, but not so with California Indians. And I wrote a lot about that in my citizen science book. And here's just a great, a lot of wonderful things being done in the Bay Area to not only bring the landscape back to healthier functioning, but to re-establish a better relationship between humans and each other and humans and the landscape. Oh, here's my San Joaquin Delta Estuary map. This is a kind of connectivity that's super important. And just to see, we might think we're sort of in one little place in San Francisco or San Carlos or Fairfax, but we are connected in this way that is inescapable through time and space, and rivers really show that. This is the Bay model, which shows it as well. So this is a map that I helped make, came out in 2017, I guess, with a little nonprofit called Nature in the City. And you can get this map through Nature in the City, which is the name of the nonprofit. If you see on this map about midway into it, you see the magnolia right there on top of Golden Gate Park. The magnolias are blooming right now in the San Francisco Botanical Garden. I highly recommend if you can make a field trip to see them in the next couple of weeks. They're spectacular. We have one of the world's important or notable collections of magnolias in the world in San Francisco. And one of the things about San Francisco is that we can grow things from all over the world here because of our climate, our microclimates. But below that magnolia is a green butterfly. It's the green hair streak butterfly. And to the right of that butterfly, the sort of green patches you see are places where a lot of work has been done to restore habitat to bring them back from the brink of extinction. And then this is the back of the map, which I'm going to just use to kind of summarize the way that I'm talking about all this. So one of the reasons I wanted to work on this map, and this goes back to my comments to Mark, about the beginning of my career, is I really like a story, right? I want to know the narrative. What's the beginning, the middle, and the end? And it turns out that this is not, something you can just put down like 3 tarot cards. It's something that is constantly unfolding. And conservation works by way of the map. Mark showed you the map of protected lands by post. And I have become fascinated with how maps can convey in basically just a few moments what it might take 700 pages to express. So up on the left, shaping the city, is the geological map of San Francisco. And this was ordered by the federal government after the 1906 earthquake. And you can see the white on the right-hand side of that map is where there's been landfill since then. And then the next map to the right is gardening the city. And this map expresses places like Golden Gate Park, where the native ecosystem, the sand dune coastal ecosystem, was transformed to create a European idea of what a garden should look like. So, we could have called it colonizing the city, but whenever I suggest anything like that, I was I was like booed, because this is a map for everybody, and we don't want to alienate people with making us feel like we're bad actors, although we have not dealt properly with nature. However, we are getting better. And down here on the bottom left, the resilient city is highlighting all sorts of restoration projects in the city that are really highly successful. And then to the right of it, again, is this connectivity of trying to express really that it's the water, it's the air, it's the land, it's all connected. When my blog ran on Post, it's still up there. You can see this illustration on the top left of a California wren tit sitting on a manzanita. And right there is some serpentine soil. And this is a view you could have seen 20,000 years ago, and you can still see it today. And underneath it is Heron's Head Park, which was, it's like still partly a Superfund site, but in doing some magnificent restorations there, incredible native species have come back. Some species that nobody even knew could possibly come back, but they did. So there again is the serpentine, the manzanita, and the bird. And then this is finally, San Francisco Bay Area does have an official designation beyond being part of the California Floristic Province. And this is another UN concept called the Biosphere Reserves. And what's good about the Biosphere Reserves is that they incorporate both aquatic and terrestrial environments. And again, these are ways of just kind of grouping interests and flows of energy together so that we can focus how we do our restoration, how we do our care of the environment we are so very lucky to live in. And this is the Xerxes blue butterfly, which I just have a thing for. It was, maybe it's those colors. This was from that 2009 book with Susan Middleton. She took this photograph. It's a specimen at the Academy. And it's a species that went extinct because of that building of Golden Gate Park, essentially, of transforming its habitat. Now, here, though, we move on to a species that's on the brink of extinction, the monarch butterfly. This is a map from Journey North of regular people's observations, like you and me, of monarchs that help show where they're moving and when, so we can help support them. And this map, again, all of this knowledge is basically based on citizen science collected information. And here is an insect that I think is calling us to our higher duties to save it. And it's doing so in a way that is cross-boundary, or cross sovereign boundaries, ultimate connectivity, Mexico and the US, and across generations, untold generations that we can't even fathom of how long this butterfly has been performing its migration. And across, all walks of life, all of us are involved with saving this butterfly. So these are special thanks to people whose slides I used, Megan, Tom, and Bruce. And that is my talk.
Wow, thank you, Mary Ellen. That was so much and so concise also. And I feel like for everybody watching, it's a study guide to go deeper on a whole variety of topics. So thank you for sharing all that. And we are going to have some time for questions from the audience. So, if you've been listening and you have any questions for Mary Ellen, you can go ahead and post them in chat now. I was just reflecting on those layers of interaction between geology and the hydrology and plant communities and animal communities that story of how bears impact nutrients in forest ecosystems, and between the waterways and terrestrial ecosystems is just such an interesting example. And I think about how personally, as I deepen my understanding of these interactions and this history, on the one hand, there's this kind of sometimes sadness or just thinking about loss, with bears and their important interactions. And then there's these examples of, hopeful news. Like you were talking about beavers, and I know that in our area, there's been instances of beavers and otters returning. I live in downtown San Jose, so we've had beavers in the Guadalupe River. I wonder if anybody has an update on that. I haven't checked in on that kind of situation for a while. So it's kind of like there's such this weight of history of, really drastic wrong turns by really Western society in the past 200 years. And then all of us trying to rediscover how to become stewards of these ecosystems, like the indigenous people of the area did so well for so long. And there's so much there. I just finally got to reading Tending the Wild, which is one of the many resources that you all should consider that Mary Ellen shared. Each one of those books that you shared, Mary Ellen, is like a tome of knowledge. So I got through that, and it really opened my eyes about ways forward for our area, integrating some of that philosophy and practices back into the landscape. And of course, empowering Native communities to take back their role. So, those are my reflections as I was watching for people to post into chat here. So I'm looking at these questions, trying to choose between them. One is, you mentioned citizen science, and one of the, your most recent book is focused on that. And can you give anybody a couple of quick tips about, if you're interested in engaging in citizen science, like what's the starting point there?
Thanks for that. Well, what I usually say is the entry drug for citizen science is iNaturalist, which is an online platform that you can join on a desktop or a laptop. And then typically you'll put it on your phone, the app, and you take observations of nature with it. And the app assigns your observation, the date, the time, the latitude, and the longitude of your observation. And just having said that, and having talked about maps and about colonialism, it's useful maybe to remember that a lot of how Native Americans' land was stolen from them was by the use of maps that didn't acknowledge that they lived on the landscape. And so this idea of what is a place and what's in it is a very contested idea, and it still is very contested. If there's ever a development issue, and you'll have somebody saying, "Look, the birds use this, to rest here at night," and the developer says, "No, they don't. Prove it." And you know what? You have to prove it with data.
Mm-hmm.
When you get down to it. So what we do really need is data about where the instances of all kinds of biodiversity are. Mm-hmm. It also helps us see how those distributions are changing. So iNaturalist is a great way to get into it. It's interesting because when I wrote Citizen Scientist and I was on a book tour, if I was in places like New York or Boston, or even some places in Europe, people are very, very, there's a lot of resources, right? There's a lot of groups, there's nonprofits, there's Audubon Society. If you like birds at all, they're giving classes. They want more members. A lot of these are very inclusive communities. with the birders, if you don't like one, there's 10 more to choose from. It's harder with other taxa. There aren't so many groups. But there's, the Fish and Wildlife will do some citizen science you can join in. Your city, the city of San Francisco, does some citizen science you can join in. But in some places, it's not really available that way. And I think it's very hard to then initiate on your own unless you are a nature nut to begin with. But it's hard to cultivate nature for yourself if you're not used to it. So how do you start? And I advocate starting with just thinking about animals that you like, or that, what do you remember from your childhood that intrigues you? And I have been writing a book about butterflies for quite some time, so I'm really getting to know about butterflies a lot. And I am finding it so interesting what more I am learning by focusing on that taxa. So focusing on one taxa, like butterflies, they're not around all year round, although in the Bay Area, sometimes they are. Plants, native plants, the California Native Plant Society is awesome. That can be harder. Birds are wonderful because they're always around one way or the other. They're hard to get a picture of unless you have a real camera. So, I just to try to keep cultivating in yourself what's your relationship to animals? And it might be really, first of all, through stories that you learned when you were a child. And that's not a bad way to start investigating. The big bad wolf, interesting. What about the trophic relationships in that story?
Thank you so much for all of that. The part I really appreciate, and I think a lot of folks in the audience appreciate, is just those examples of how citizen science data can be applied. So why it's so important. And, some tips for connecting and, building relationships. I really love that too. Another thought that we shared, before the end of the year, we did a program with some of our volunteers talking about, New Year's resolutions for the land and how to commit yourself to helping to take care of your place. So one of the thoughts that we had is, you could commit yourself to an individual park or spot in your neighborhood, and build a relationship with that place. A lot of people live next to a particular preserve. And so if you want, you could, commit yourself to visiting that place every season, observing the changes, learning about the plants and animals there. And in that way, kind of build some ownership over that place and maybe figure out ways to contribute there as well. Yeah.
Well, I love that. And I live about a mile from Chrissy Field, and I go there every day if I can. Now, I focus a lot on the seabirds there because they're coming and going, and I love them. I'm fascinated by them. But there's also been this Indian paintbrush growing there, and I have been tracking that. And I'm finding out some interesting patterns that I don't know the answer to at all. But I do see that there's a pattern to how they're growing, and I have questions about that. And that leads me further into, you can really call up or text or email like the Presidio wildlife people and say, what about that Indian paintbrush? And they'll give you information, and then they want to engage with the public. So I think that idea of going to the same spot and observing something that you like, that you're interested in over and over again, you will see patterns. You will see patterns. And then when you see the patterns, you're just all in.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, for me when that started happening for me, and I hear so many stories about that. And in terms of ways to engage, I don't think we're going to go into that because a bunch of our audience members actually just shared great examples of citizen science projects like the Backyard Bird Count, or engaging with the Xerces Society, CNPS, all these different organizations. So I encourage you all to look at chat and learn from, your community member neighbors and peers about how to engage there. And we are at the top of the hour now, Mary Ellen, and there's also a huge number of thankful comments for the amazing presentation that you just gave us. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us. It was really exceptional, and I appreciate you so much. We all appreciate you. So with that, I want to share your website.
I should mention one more thing, Mark, about citizen science. The California Academy of Sciences has a wonderful community science program, and you can do citizen science with and through them. And coming up in the next couple weeks is a webinar about the coast, the coastal observations using iNaturalist and the Cal Academy. You can find out about that on their website. But that's a great way into citizen science, is through the California Academy of Sciences.
That's wonderful. And they, and so they developed iNaturalist, was it? Yeah.
No, Scott Laurie and Kenichi Ueda invented it, and then the Academy houses them, but it's partly funded by National Geographic and partly by the Academy. But they're like everybody else; they're a nonprofit looking for.
Yeah, wonderful. And just so again, check out Mary Ellen Hannibal's website. Great information there. And also check out our upcoming events. One person in chat asked about restoration efforts for streams and rivers in the area. And actually, one of our next programs will be with naturalist and founder of Saved by Nature, Richard Tejeda. And he's going to be talking all about the fish of the peninsula in the South Bay. So you could learn a lot there. So with that, thank you, Mary Ellen Hannibal. I hope you get out to Crissy Field and enjoy the sunny weekend. Well, it might rain, but enjoy the weekend.
Thank you. You too, Mark.
All right. Have a nice weekend, everybody. See you next time.